After the Soviet Union collapsed, the world entered a new era. The Cold War had ended, and the ideological struggle that had defined the 20th century was suddenly over. The red flag came down in Moscow, and with it, decades of global tension seemed to dissolve overnight. The United States stood alone as the world's undisputed superpower, its influence stretching across continents. American policymakers saw an opportunity to shape a new world order, one where U.S. interests and values would reign supreme. Washington's strategy was clear: prevent Russia or China from ever becoming peer competitors. The goal was to ensure that no rival could ever again threaten American primacy, whether militarily, economically, or ideologically. The U.S. aimed to weaken, isolate, and if possible, fragment these Eurasian giants to secure its dominance. This approach was rooted in the belief that only by keeping Russia and China divided and internally preoccupied could American leadership remain unchallenged. For Russia, this meant managing its decline and blocking any resurgence. The country was left to grapple with economic chaos, political instability, and a loss of global influence. The West hoped that a weakened Russia would never again pose a threat. For China, it meant integrating it into the global economy on Western terms while containing its ambitions. The U.S. encouraged economic reforms, but always with the aim of keeping China dependent on Western markets and technology. The U.S. expanded Western institutions to Russia's borders, most notably through NATO enlargement. This move was seen as a way to lock in American influence and prevent Moscow from regaining its former sphere of control. Washington also supported friendly political movements in former Soviet states, encouraging democratic reforms and Western alignment. These efforts were designed to pull these countries out of Russia's orbit. At the same time, the U.S. encouraged separatist sentiments in both Russia and China, hoping that internal divisions would further weaken their ability to project power abroad. The hope was that these pressures would keep Moscow and Beijing focused inward, unable to challenge American leadership on the world stage. U.S. officials believed that a divided and distracted Russia and China would pose little threat. But this strategy underestimated the power of nationalism, the deep-rooted pride and resilience within both societies. Instead of crumbling under pressure, both countries began to look for ways to push back. The constant pressure from the West failed to anticipate that it could unite, rather than divide, its targets. Facing common threats, Russia and China found new reasons to cooperate and strengthen their partnership. Instead of neutralizing Russia and China, U.S. actions set the stage for a powerful backlash, one that would reshape the global balance of power in ways Washington never intended. Central to U.S. strategy was NATO's eastward expansion. While the West saw this as spreading stability, Moscow viewed it as a direct threat and a betrayal of post-Cold War promises. Each new NATO member, Poland, Hungary, the Baltic states, deepened Russian fears of encirclement. The deployment of NATO troops and missile systems near Russia's borders fueled resentment and suspicion. This eroded any goodwill and pushed Russia to seek new alliances to counterbalance the West. Instead of securing Europe, NATO expansion poisoned relations with Moscow and triggered a security dilemma. Defensive moves by one side were seen as offensive threats by the other, escalating mistrust. The result? Russia became more open to partnerships with other nations wary of U.S. power. U.S. strategy in the early 21st century extended far beyond traditional military or economic competition. It also targeted the internal political dynamics of Russia and China, seeking to influence the very fabric of their societies and governments. One of the most significant tools in this approach was support for so-called color revolutions, popular uprisings that swept through Eastern Europe and Central Asia, often marked by vibrant symbols and mass protests demanding democratic reforms. The Rose Revolution in Georgia, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan all signaled a dramatic shift in the region. While many in the West saw these as movements for freedom, Moscow and Beijing viewed them as US-backed coups designed to undermine their influence and install pro-Western governments on their borders. In Russia, the US was widely perceived as sympathetic to Chechen separatists, often framing the brutal conflict in Chechnya as a struggle for self-determination rather than a matter of Russian internal security. This narrative fueled suspicions in Moscow that Washington was intent on weakening Russia from within. Beijing faced similar challenges: U.S. support for Taiwan's autonomy, vocal criticism over human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet, and open backing of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong were seen as direct threats to China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Both Russian and Chinese leaders interpreted these moves as deliberate attempts to destabilize and fragment their countries, using internal dissent as a weapon to erode their power and legitimacy. Instead of sowing division, these pressures had an unintended consequence. Moscow and Beijing, once wary of each other, began to see themselves as partners facing a common threat from the West. The result was a powerful sense of shared vulnerability, which drove both nations to deepen cooperation on security, intelligence, and regional stability. Joint military exercises and intelligence sharing became more frequent and robust. Rather than turning inward or retreating from the world stage, Russia and China found unity in resisting what they saw as foreign interference, presenting a united front in international forums and military alliances. Ironically, U.S. efforts to promote internal dissent and support separatist sentiments only pushed Moscow and Beijing closer together, strengthening their resolve to defend their sovereignty. In the end, the strategy backfired, forging a stronger and more resilient partnership between Russia and China, one built on mutual suspicion of the West and a shared determination to resist external pressure. By the 2010s, U.S. strategy toward its main rivals underwent a dramatic transformation. No longer content with simply containing the influence of Russia and China, American policymakers shifted to a more aggressive posture, one that embraced direct confrontation across multiple fronts. After Russia's annexation of Crimea and its military intervention in Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies imposed sweeping sanctions. These measures targeted Russian banks, energy exports, and advanced technology sectors, aiming to isolate Moscow from global markets and cripple its economic power. Meanwhile, tensions with China escalated into a full-blown trade war. The U.S. slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, and moved to restrict the global reach of tech giants like Huawei, citing national security concerns. The overarching goal was clear: to weaken Russia's economy, disrupt its financial system, and slow China's rapid technological and economic ascent. Factories closed, markets tumbled, and ordinary citizens felt the sting of these policies. On the military front, the U.S. reinforced NATO's eastern borders, supplied advanced weaponry and training to Ukrainian forces, and increased its naval presence in the South China Sea to challenge Beijing's territorial ambitions. Simultaneously, information campaigns ramped up, portraying Moscow and Beijing as grave authoritarian threats to the global order. Western media and officials highlighted human rights abuses and anti-democratic actions, shaping public opinion at home and abroad. Yet these escalating tactics did not force Russia or China to back down. Instead, they fueled suspicions of a coordinated U.S. effort to undermine both governments, deepening mistrust and resentment. In response, Russia and China set aside old rivalries and began to deepen their cooperation, forging new economic, military, and diplomatic ties. Rather than weakening their resolve, the mounting pressure only brought Moscow and Beijing closer together, encouraging joint military exercises and strategic agreements. Ironically, the U.S. campaign to divide its rivals ended up forging a stronger partnership between them, with both nations presenting a united front on the world stage. In the end, the strategy produced the opposite of its intended effect, solidifying an alliance that would reshape global power dynamics for years to come. U.S. pressure forged a powerful Russia-China partnership. Facing a shared threat, Moscow and Beijing set aside old suspicions to build a comprehensive alliance. Russia supplied advanced military technology to China, including air defense systems and fighter jets. Joint military exercises became frequent and complex, signaling readiness to act together. What began as pragmatic cooperation evolved into a deep strategic entente. Both nations now champion a multipolar world order, challenging U.S. dominance. The U.S. strategy of confronting both powers simultaneously created a unified adversary. Two separate challenges became one formidable bloc. The Russia-China partnership is anchored by deep economic ties. As Western sanctions hit Russia, China became its key economic partner, symbolized by the Power of Siberia gas pipeline. Russia redirected energy exports eastward, while China supplied goods and technology, filling the void left by the West. Both nations support China's Belt and Road Initiative, integrating their economies outside Western systems. A major goal: reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar, Trade is increasingly settled in rubles and yuan, bypassing the dollar and challenging American financial power. This economic alliance shields both countries from US pressure. Together, they are building an alternative economic bloc, less vulnerable to Western sanctions. Their integration is a direct response to US attempts at isolation. Russia and China now present a united diplomatic front. At the UN Security Council, they coordinate vetoes to block US-backed resolutions. High-level consultations ensure consistent strategy. They are building alternative institutions, BRICS, the New Development Bank, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to rival Western-led systems. BRICS has expanded, inviting new members and challenging the G7's influence. These platforms offer developing nations alternatives to Western loans and rules. The US strategy of isolation has accelerated the rise of a broader anti-Western coalition. Russia and China are reshaping the global order, attracting countries seeking a multipolar world. US strategy has triggered a new, more dangerous nuclear arms race. Pressuring both Russia and China pushed them into closer military alignment and spurred China's rapid nuclear expansion. The US now faces two nuclear peer adversaries, a scenario it is unprepared for. China's arsenal has grown from 200 to over 600 warheads, with more to come. Both nations are investing in advanced missiles and anti-satellite weapons. This three-way arms race has rendered old arms control treaties obsolete. The risk of miscalculation and escalation is higher than ever. The US must now deter two coordinated nuclear powers. Instead of securing dominance, America's strategy has made the world more unstable. The cost and danger of this new arms race are immense. America's strategy to divide and weaken Russia and China has backfired. Instead of preventing a rival bloc, US policies fused Moscow and Beijing into a formidable alliance. Their partnership is deep, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Joint military drills, energy pipelines, and trade in local currencies are all signs of a durable bloc. This alliance now challenges US influence worldwide, from Africa to the expansion of BRICS. The US faces a coordinated front, complicating its global strategy. A new three-way arms race strains American resources and increases global risk. The attempt to preserve unipolar dominance has accelerated its end. Overreach has provoked a powerful backlash, creating new dangers. The US now confronts a far more complex and contested world, one shaped by the very strategy it pursued.